In this video, we'll be replacing the motor mount in this 2005 Honda Element. Could also be called your transmission mount. Before we begin this process, we're going to put a jack underneath the transmission side of the motor so we can support the motor up while we remove the motor mount. So we're on the transmission, and all we're going to do is just give it just a little push up just to hold it in place. Now we can move on to the motor mount. So to remove our air intake and air filter box, we're going to need to remove all of these hoses and harnesses attached. We're going to start low and work our way to the back. So down here, you can either disconnect this from here or your throttle body. We'll disconnect it from the top here. I'm just going to press that clip and unplug it. We can set that aside. Have this hose here, which is just going to pull out. A lot of these connections are just going to pull right out. Move these around. Here, we actually have a little hose clamp. We'll try with this one. If that doesn't work here, we'll move back here. Okay, that worked. I'm just going to reattach this clamp so we don't end up losing it. Okay, nothing on the back. There is one hose clamp connecting this tube to your throttle body. Our hose clamp actually came off. It was completely rusted and corroded. It just fell off. So you will have one more hose clamp down the bottom connecting to your throttle body. Moving back to our air filter box, we have 4 Phillips or 8mm bolts. We're going to remove them now using the 8mm option. These will probably break or strip. There's one stripped. So this hose here that we removed from this fitting, we're actually going to pull this right off of this tube. Just spin that right out. We're going to set this aside. You should also have one more hose clamp right here. We don't have one. We will be replacing it. But for now, to remove the front portion of your intake tube, I'm just going to pull that right off of the air box. And now we can twist and pull that right off of our throttle body and set this aside. Okay, now the front of your air filter box can come right off. Okay, now you can take your air filter right out. Now to remove your air filter box, you're going to have 2 bolts. There's going to be one back here and another one right underneath your brake fluid reservoir. Going to be 10mm. There's one more straight down here. With those 3 bolts loosened up and these out of the way, you should be able to now remove your air box. But on the driver's side of your airbox, it's still attached here to your intake. We're not going to remove the intake, but we are going to remove the box from that. We're going to spin this hose, pry it right off, and we can now take our airbox right out. Now we can go ahead and remove this rubber hose here that went to our intake box. We're just going to grab that and twist and pull off. And up at the top here, you can see that the end kind of rolls back. We're going to roll that back as well and see if we can get that to come off, just like that. So now that you have a bunch of access cleared out here, we're going to start to remove our motor mount. We have a few bolts facing upwards between the mount itself and the transmission part of the mount, and a bolt going forward to rear. We're going to start with the 2 bolts on the bottom of our fender well facing straight up. Going to be 17 millimeter. All right, there's one. We'll have to grab a magnet to pick that up. All right, so there's your front bolt on the fender well side. Now behind that, on the other side of the motor mount, there'll be one more bolt. Then there's going to be one up top here. That's going to be the fender well side. So this one here, we have a few extensions and a swivel allowed us, and a deep socket allowed us to get down onto that bolt. The swivel's needed because of the harness and the angle, and with the motor mount rubber there. And there's your bolt. The next bolt here is on the top of the motor mount on our fender well. This will be the last bolt actually holding this side of your motor. So you want to make sure your jack is still good, everything's in place. And you want to keep an eye, once you release this, if there's any shift down in your motor, you're going to want to make that up by jacking your jack back up. So now we're going to remove our 3 bolts on the transmission side of this motor mount. We're going to take this out as one assembly, and we'll remove the bolt going through the 2 pieces on the bench. These bolts here are going to be 17 millimeters as well. There's one. There's 2. And the last one. Now with these 3 bolts removed, we can reach in and take our transmission / motor mount out as one assembly. So what we need to do now is remove our actual motor mount or transmission mount from this plate here. If you were to do this in the car, this bolt is all the way through. It would come all the way out and hit your battery box, which is why we're doing it on the bench. Now we have full access to that bolt with no restrictions. We can take that bolt out. That's going to be a 17 millimeter as well. Just a vise would be preferable, but we're going to use the bench with an impact here. Now you can see it just slides right out. We'll go ahead and set that aside. And our new one is going to go right in the same place, same position. All right, we're going to try and put our ears in the same orientation. Put our bolt back through. And if you can, when you tighten this down, set it in the same position. That'd be fantastic, because what you're going to have to do once it's tight in the vehicle is push this down to match the fender well area. So ideally you don't want to leave this bolt loose. That's just more work you're going to have to do coming in with a wrench to tighten this up. So get this as close to the original position as you can. Much easier to do in a vise. Now that's it. We're ready to put it back in the car. So we're going to put our motor mount in. You'll notice it's loose. What we've done off camera is loosen it back up to show you what you would have to do if you didn't get that exact angle while you put it back together. So what you'll do is drop it in place. You'll line up your bolts, both front and back. Once you're lined up, what I suggest is taking one bolt and putting it in the top here. That's going to hold the motor mount from running around on you. You don't have to thread it all the way back in. A few threads, enough to stop that from moving. You have a stud here, which is going to stop the bottom from moving. You don't want them to open up or close up. So now that you know your bolt holes are aligned, you can grab your 17mm wrench and tighten down this bolt in the center. And it may be a little bit tough to get this all the way tightened up. So once you get it tight enough where nothing's moving, you can take it back out of the vehicle and retighten it with your impact if you decide to. All right, so that's pretty good. We'll take it up and you see it's not moving around. So we'll just give that bolt right there another quick little hit with the impact. Put it back in just to check. Everything looks good and nothing shifted. We'll start to put our bolts back in. So we're going to start on the fender well side here with our 3 bolts. Now these bottom 2 are going to be a little difficult to thread in. We're going to lower them down into position with a magnet. If you have a magnetic socket, it's even better. And we'll take our socket and our extension and by hand start these bolts. Okay, we'll do the same thing on the back. Now the back one moved a little bit on us, so we're just going to have to pull it and line it up. We'll do the same thing with our socket and our extension. And while we're already there, go ahead and snug that one up. move up to the top bolt here. And down to the last bolt on the fender well side. And now from here, we're going to work on the transmission bolts. So you can see there's just a little bit of movement on the transmission side of that motor mount. You may have to push or pull to get your bolts or studs to line up. All right, so we got that one threaded in. We're just going to back it out just a little bit, so that way we still have a little movement in case we need it for our other bolt here, which it looks like we will need a little bit more movement on that. There we go. Okay, that one's started. Let's go ahead and snug that one up also. And then we can take our nut, put it down onto the forwardmost stud here. We'll snug that up as well. Now ideally everything goes back into the same position. You can see where our old bolt used to sit and our old nut used to sit. So what we're going to do is take a pry bar right in here and just push this plate in towards the fender well side. Just like that. And then we'll tighten everything down. Once that's done, your motor mount or transmission mount is done. We can now reinstall this tube here for our intake. This tube here is just going to go right over. I'm just going to press it into place, just like so. Now we can start to reinstall the rest of our intake box. So now we're going to put our filter housing or air box into place. First thing we're going to do is move our cables out of the way. Second thing we're going to do is lower our air box down in and then align this hose here. We'll go ahead and lower our air box into place. We're not going to be able to get it 100% lined up until we get this hose on. So now that that's down there, we'll get this hose on. Oh, there we go. All right, so now we can just press this in a little tighter, make sure it's seated 100%. And with an 8mm on this specific hose clamp, yours might be slightly different. I'm going to tighten this down. All right, so now we have 1, 2, 3 bolts. They're going to be 10mm bolts to hold our air box in place. And as we removed this one, it actually fell apart and broke. So we're going to have to come up with a replacement for that. But as of right now, we're going to continue to move along and reassemble our air box. Now we can put our filter back in. Now, just a side note, if your filter looks like this, you want to definitely go ahead and replace it. All right, I'm gonna seat that down in there, and now we can put the top of our air box back on. So now we can reinstall the top of our air box. Now, as we were removing it, it started to fall apart. Now this one's actually frozen and rusted in place. This one's moving freely. This one's also moving freely. Ideally, these would all be fine, or ideally, we'd have two opposite sides. So this one should slide in and out of this center, or this sleeve here. And it's not moving at all, so which just means it's frozen. You can try and press it back in here and reuse it. For right now, to move forward, we are going to reassemble with what we have. So we're just going to put this in place. Okay. This one's actually stripped out, so we'll try and use the Phillips head option on that. No, so there's a lot of corrosion in the Phillips area there. So we're just going to have to try and spin this closed with a pair of pliers or locking pliers. All right, so we've got a pair of locking pliers on here now. The reason we're doing this is the head on this is stripped, so it won't take an 8mm. It's too big for a 7, and the Phillips option is rusted in. So we only have 2 screws left on this air box. We want to make sure we get them both tightened down. Now ideally, we don't have any air gaps here or any air loss coming through the sides here, so we may end up coming up with some solution for these two. For right now, we're going to continue moving forward and reassemble. Now we can put our intake tube onto our throttle body. Now I'm just going to loosen up our hose clamp just a little more. Now for this, we had to put 2 hose clamps together. If you can find 1 hose clamp the right size, ideally that's a better situation. And now we can start to locate the upper end onto our air box, or our filter housing. We've got a little notch here that we have to line up. And we're going to have to put 1 more hose clamp up around here. We'll do that at the very end. So now that we're lined up, top and bottom, we're going to tighten down our hose clamp on our throttle body side. Again, 8mm on this specific hose clamp. Yours might be slightly different. And now from here, we can start to reattach our hoses and our lines that are attached to this part of the intake tube. We'll start here. We're just going to press this line in and then push this onto this hose barb here. Now on this side, we have a few more lines. We'll start with this one here. We're going to need a pair of long needle nose or a pair of needle nose. Squeeze this clamp and reattach this line. Just press it right on. Now we can put our hose clamp back in. All right, now this line, I'm just going to press in. This one already kind of fell into place. It's just going to press in. All right, so our electrical connection that we tucked down here earlier, we're going to pop this right back into its little holder, and we're going to run our electrical line under those cables, come around, and plug it back in. All right, now if you really want to, you can pull it back, and just tuck away that line. Now from here, if we follow these 2 lines up and backwards, we're going to put these back into place. Your thicker line is going to go into the lower lock here. We're just going to press it right down in. And the upper line, same thing. It's going to go on the top. Just get pressed right in. Sometimes you need a little extra help. Just use a pair of pliers and we'll squeeze that down in. All right, so up top here we were missing a hose clamp to start. So again, we put a couple hose clamps together to get the size that we needed. Now that you're all done, you can go ahead and release the jack and pull it out.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.